hands. My husband wasn't jealous of my best friend, and he was drowning in loneliness I created.
My name is Alina, and for years I thought I understood my husband, Mark. I thought I understood love, communication, boundaries, everything. But the truth is, I understood nothing at all. I used to laugh when Mark got jealous. Not the screaming, door-slamming kind of jealousy, and not the controlling, "who are you texting" type. It was quieter. It was the subtle tightening of his jaw whenever I spent a little too long talking with Adrian, my best friend since college. I always brushed it off. "Relax, Mark," I'd say with a smirk. "You're being so dramatic." He'd force a smile. But his eyes always told a different story, one I stubbornly refused to read. Adrian and I had one of those effortlessly close friendships. We had inside jokes that went back years. We had late-night phone calls where I'd rant about my day. We had deep, philosophical conversations that Mark rarely, if ever, heard from me. Looking back, I realize Adrian probably knew my moods and my triggers better than Mark did, and Mark noticed. He always noticed. One evening, Adrian had been over at our apartment. He'd just gone on a long rant about his job, and I'd listened intently, offering advice and support. After he left, the silence felt heavy. Mark turned to me from the couch and asked quietly, "Do you realize you talk to him differently? Like, he gets a version of you I haven't seen in a long time." I rolled my eyes so hard the air in the room probably shifted. "Mark, please, don't be insecure." "You know he's like a brother to me." Mark just nodded, as if he believed me, but I could see it. It was like a tiny fracture forming in glass, a crack that I had just created. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. I'd catch Mark scrolling through old photos of us on his phone pictures from our anniversary dinners, our vacations in Italy, moments where we looked like two people completely and utterly in love. I'd walk by and say, half laughing, "What's with the nostalgic kick?" He'd just shrug without looking up. "Just remembering when we were closer?" And like a complete idiot, I shrugged it off again. I didn't see it as a plea. I saw it as a complaint. The night everything fell apart was painfully ordinary. Adrian came over for dinner. He was in top form, telling funny stories, making jokes, and he made me laugh louder and harder than I had in months. Throughout the meal, Mark stayed mostly quiet. He was polite, of course, but he was distant, like a guest in his own home. After Adrian left, the house felt different. It was too quiet, too heavy. The air was thick with things unsaid. Mark stood at the sink, his back to me, methodically washing the dishes. I leaned against the counter, still buzzing from the evening, and decided to poke the bear. "You're not seriously upset just because I laughed, are you?" Silence, just the sound of water and the gentle clink of plates. So I pushed harder, a little more annoyed. "You're jealous, aren't you?" He turned off the water and dried his hands slowly, deliberately. He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't angry. They were just tired, so incredibly tired. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "I guess I am." I rolled my eyes again. "That was my signature move, my defense mechanism. You really need to work on that. I've told you 1,000,000 times, Adrian is like a brother." Mark gave the smallest, saddest smile I had ever seen. "That's the problem, Alina," he said. "He feels closer to you than I do." And I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. It was a dismissive, patronizing sound. I honestly thought he was being dramatic again, manufacturing a problem out of nothing. He walked past me towards our bedroom, paused at the door, and said the last sentence he'd ever say to me as my husband under that roof. "I used to feel lucky being your husband. Now I just feel like a bystander in your life." I went to bed irritated, stewing over his so-called insecurity. When I woke up the next morning, his side of the bed was empty. That wasn't unusual. He often got up early, but this time, his closet was half empty too. His suitcase was gone. There was no note. No angry text, no explanation. Just his absence, echoing through every room in the house. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again, voicemail, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before I met him. Pure, cold fear. By noon, the fear had turned into full-blown panic that swallowed me whole. Mark didn't answer my calls. He didn't respond to my dozens of texts. He didn't check our shared bank account. He didn't come home from work. He had disappeared the same way he lived his life with me, quietly, peacefully and completely. The man who loved me so gently had left me just as gently. And somehow that hurt more than any shouting match ever could. In my desperation, I went through old texts he'd sent me, messages I used to barely glance at. "Don't forget your jacket, it's cold today. Drive safe. I made you coffee, it's on the counter. You looked tired last night. Try to get some rest." They were tiny, everyday acts of love that I had treated like background noise. Now, reading them back, they felt like final warnings. Each one was a small, quiet plea for connection that I had ignored. I met with Adrian a few days later, hoping he could help me piece myself back together, maybe talk some sense into me. But as I sat across from him at our usual coffee shop, it was the first time I looked at him with true clarity. He wasn't the villain in this story. He hadn't done anything wrong. I was the one who was guilty. Every time Adrian spoke, all I could hear was Mark's voice echoing in my head. "I just feel like a bystander in your life." I started replaying every single moment. Every time Mark tried to tell me he was hurting, how I mocked him instead of listening. How I called him insecure when he was just being vulnerable. How I valued the easy validation of an old friendship over the hard, necessary work of marriage. A week later, a plain manila envelope arrived in the mail. There was no handwritten note on top, no return address. Inside were divorce papers. And at the bottom of the first page, there was one line written in Mark's neat, familiar handwriting. I finally learned that love shouldn't feel like begging for attention. That single sentence hit me with the force of a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. The papers slipped from my hand, and I just cried. I cried until my head ached and I couldn't see straight. Because for the very first time, I truly, deeply understood what I had done to him. It wasn't jealousy he felt all those years, it was loneliness. A profound loneliness right next to me, inside a marriage with me, because of me. A month passed before I found out where he'd gone. A mutual friend mentioned he'd moved to a small coastal town about 2 hours away. He'd rented a little place by the water. He was freelancing as a graphic designer, finally pursuing the dream he'd always put on the back burner for us. A quick search online brought up his new portfolio, and there were pictures of him. He was happy, genuinely happy, without me. I wrote him a letter, a long one. Not to try and win him back, I knew that ship had sailed. It was because some truths simply have to be spoken, even if only to yourself. I wrote, "You weren't jealous, Mark. You were hurting. And I made fun of your pain instead of holding it. I'm so sorry. I never sent it." I realize some apologies don't deserve to be heard. They only live inside the person who caused the damage as a permanent reminder of the cost of not listening. I broke his heart quietly, and in the end, all I'm left with is the silence.